Alright, folks, welcome back to Boss Economic World. The only show that dives headfirst into the economic mosh pit so you don't have to. I'm your host, and today we're heading to the heart of the old continent, to Brussels and Frankfurt, where a fascinating, slightly absurd drama is unfolding. Picture this: the European Union, the world's self-appointed captain of Team Planet, has a grand, ambitious plan to go green. We're talking about the Green Deal, a plan so epic it makes Captain Planet look like a weekend recycler. A key part of this plan involves making pollution expensive. Makes sense, right? You make a mess, you pay to clean it up. But here's the twist. It's November 2025, and the politicians who wrote the plan are suddenly looking at the bill, looking at the voters, and getting a serious case of cold feet. They're thinking of hitting the snooze button on a major part of this green transition. And who's freaking out? Not just the environmentalists. No, the real panic is setting in over at the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. The guardians of the euro, the high priests of price stability, are watching this political maneuvering and realizing their whole economic forecast might be about to go up in smoke, or rather, not go up in smoke, which is precisely the problem. Today, we're unraveling a story about how trying to save the planet might just force the ECB to fire up the monetary stimulus engines once again. It's a tangled web of green ambitions, political cowardice, and the weird, wonderful world of inflation targeting. Buckle up, because this is a wild ride. So, to understand why the folks at the ECB are collectively chewing their nails down to the quick, we need to talk about something called the Emissions Trading System, or ETS. Now, stay with me, I promise this isn't as boring as it sounds. Think of the EU's atmosphere as an exclusive nightclub. The bouncer has a strict capacity limit on how much carbon dioxide can be in the club at any one time. This is the cap. To get in, big polluters, power plants, industrial factories, airlines have to buy a ticket. These tickets are called carbon allowances. This has been the system for years, it's called ETS1. If a company is really efficient and pollutes less, it has leftover tickets it can sell to a dirtier company that needs more. That's the trade part of cap and trade. It creates a market for pollution and, in theory, incentivizes everyone to get cleaner to save or make money. So far, so good. It's a system for the big boys. But the EU, in its infinite wisdom, decided that to really meet its climate goals, it needed to bring everyone to the party. And by everyone, I mean you. Enter ETS2. This is the sequel, the director's cut, the expansion pack that extends this pay-to-pollute concept to two things that hit every single household: road transport and buildings. Let that sink in. Starting in 2027, or at least, that was the plan, the fuel you put in your car and the natural gas or oil you use to heat your home were set to be included in this system. The companies that sell you that fuel would have to buy these carbon allowances, and you can bet your last euro they would pass that cost directly onto you at the pump and on your utility bill. We're not talking about pennies here. The German government's own expert council on climate change estimated that by 2030, the price of a ton of CO2 could hit €275. Let's make that real. For a typical gasoline car, that could mean an extra 15 to 20 cents per liter at the pump. For a family heating their home with natural gas, it could mean an extra €200 to €300 per year on their bill. This isn't a rich people problem. This is a can I afford to drive to my job problem. It's a do I turn the heat down to 16 degrees Celsius in a Berlin winter problem. And European politicians, who have a slightly better memory than a goldfish, remember what happens when you mess with fuel prices. Anyone recall the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests in France? That whole movement was sparked by a planned eco-tax on fuel. It led to months of protests, riots, and a massive political headache for President Macron. So, with the European economy already wobbly, with voters already angry about the cost of living, and with defense budgets ballooning thanks to the never-ending conflict in Ukraine, politicians are looking at ETS2 and seeing not a green utopia, but a political suicide mission. And that brings us to today, November 12, 2025. The European Council, which is basically the club of EU national leaders, and the European Parliament have looked at the numbers, polled their constituents, and collectively decided, you know what? Maybe 2027 is a bit ambitious. They are now officially pushing to postpone the rollout of ETS2. They're not canceling it, oh no, that would be admitting defeat. This is the classic political two-step: we are 100% committed to our long-term goals, but the short-term is a little inconvenient right now, so we'll just kick this can down the road a bit. The official excuse is to soften the impact. But the real reason is raw political survival. Commitment to the EU's Green Deal, which was all the rage a few years ago when money was cheap and the economy was booming, is clearly waning. It's easy to be a climate warrior in theory. It's a lot harder when you have to explain to a factory worker in Bavaria why his commute now costs him an extra €50 a month, especially when his government is also asking him to tighten his belt to fund more tanks and artillery shells for Eastern Europe. The EU is caught in a trilemma. It wants 1. Green leadership, to be the global standard bearer for climate action. 2. Economic growth, to pull its economy out of the mud. 3. Social stability, to keep its citizens happy and avoid a populist backlash. Right now, it can't have all three. ETS2 is where green leadership directly clashes with social stability. And in a democracy, when the voters get angry, social stability almost always wins. So, the plan is being delayed. Maybe to 2028, maybe with a phased rollout as ECB President Christine Lagarde hopefully suggested before the politicians pulled the rug out from under her. But the bottom line is, that jolt of inflation that everyone was expecting in 2027 is suddenly disappearing from the forecast. And that, my friends, is where our story shifts from the halls of Parliament in Brussels to the sterile, data-driven corridors of the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. To understand the ECB's panic, you have to understand their religion. And their religion has one central commandment: thou shalt have inflation at 2% over the medium term. Not 4%. Not 0%. But 2%. Why 2%? It's the Goldilocks number. High enough to avoid the dreaded deflationary death spiral where prices fall, people stop spending because they expect things to get even cheaper, and the economy grinds to a halt. But it's low enough that it doesn't erode your savings into dust. For a central banker, 2% is nirvana. It's the perfect soufflé. Now, the ECB, like all central banks, spends a huge amount of time and money forecasting where inflation is going. Their latest outlook, even before this ETS2 mess, was already looking a bit weak. As you can see here, they were projecting inflation to be 1.7% in 2026 and 1.9% in 2027. That's an undershoot. They were already failing, just barely, to meet their own target. But hidden deep within their models, like a secret ingredient, was ETS2. All the big brains at the ECB and private banks had calculated the inflationary impact of this new carbon price. As our friends at Bloomberg Economics reckon, ETS2 was expected to provide a lift of 0.2 percentage points or more to the inflation rate in 2027. Let's do some simple, back-of-the-napkin math. The ECB's 2027 forecast was 1.9%. You subtract the 0.2% from the now-delayed ETS2. What do you get? 1.7%. Suddenly, the ECB isn't just staring at a tiny undershoot in 2027. They're staring at a significant and persistent undershoot, on top of the one they already expect next year. The soufflé isn't just a little flat, it's threatening to turn into a pancake. The analysts are all over this. Greg Fusisi at JP Morgan put it plainly: the concentrated effect in 2027 is now likely to be removed from the staff projections. Rune Johansson at Danske Bank is even more direct, stating that without ETS2, the inflation undershooting is likely to be larger. This isn't some abstract academic debate. This is a direct challenge to the ECB's credibility. They have one job: price stability, and their own forecasts are telling them they're about to fail at it for the third year in a row. Some policymakers, like Lithuania's Gediminas Simkus, have been warning about this for months. He basically said that the entire forecast of returning to 2% inflation relied heavily on ETS2. He was the guy in the corner yelling, "Hey everyone, our entire plan is balanced on this one single policy." Is that a good idea? And now, that single policy is crumbling. The ECB is a giant, powerful institution, but its job is being complicated by factors completely outside of its control. They're trying to steer this massive economic tanker through a storm, and the politicians keep changing the maps. They're already worried about a potential trade war if Donald Trump wins the next US election, they're worried about fiscal irresponsibility in debt-laden countries like Italy, and now the EU itself has just thrown a disinflationary wrench into their engine. So what does a central bank do when it sees inflation consistently falling short of its target? Well, it reaches into its toolbox. This is where the real fight begins, inside the ECB's hallowed governing council. It's the age-old battle between the doves and the hawks. The doves are the officials who worry more about weak growth and low inflation. They're the ones who are quicker to advocate for cutting interest rates to stimulate the economy. Cheaper money encourages businesses to invest and people to spend, which should, in theory, push inflation up. The hawks are the opposite. They are obsessed with fighting inflation. They worry that cutting rates too early or too much will let the inflation genie out of the bottle. They're always the ones pushing for higher rates. Right now, the ETS2 delay is a massive gift to the doves. Their argument is simple and powerful. Our mandate is 2% inflation. Our forecasts, thanks to this political delay, now show us falling well short of that target. We have a duty to act. This is a clear disinflationary shock, and our job is to offset it. Therefore, we must consider another interest rate cut. Rune Johansson from Danske Bank spelled it out: this whole situation is an argument for favoring another cut. The doves will be pounding the table in the next ECB meeting, arguing that the bank's symmetry, its promise to fight low inflation just as hard as it fights high inflation, is on the line. If they do nothing, they look like they only care when inflation is too high, which would damage their credibility for years. But the hawks are not going to give up without a fight. Their counter-argument will go something like this. Hold your horses. First, let's not overreact to a single political decision. The economy has actually been surprisingly resilient. Look at the GDP numbers from the third quarter, they surprised to the upside. Second, core inflation, which strips out volatile energy and food, is still sticky. If we cut rates now, we might just reignite the wrong kind of inflation. And third, our tools can't fix everything. monetary policy can't solve political uncertainty or global trade disruptions. Let's wait and see. This is the nuanced view you hear from economists like Jens Eisenschmidt at Morgan Stanley. He says the ETS2 issue alone might not be a decisive reason to cut, especially if the economy stays strong. But, and this is a huge but, if the economy also weakens, then the pendulum could swing toward further easing. So the stage is set for a major showdown. Christine Lagarde, who has to herd these cats, is in an incredibly tough spot. The market is already sniffing this out. Analysts like Ruben Segura-Kewela at Bank of America have noted the ECB's high pain threshold for an inflation undershoot. They were so scarred by the inflation spike of 2022 to 2023 that they're hesitant to cut. B of A even gave up on their call for a December 2025 rate cut. But they now think the pressure will become so immense that the ECB will be forced to question its own stance and will eventually be pushed to cut by March 2026. So, let's bring this all home. A complex, bureaucratic climate policy in Brussels is about to have very real-world consequences for your money. What's the takeaway? For the average European citizen, on one hand, this delay is a short-term win for your wallet. The planned price hike on your gas and heating bills for 2027 is now on ice. You can breathe a small sigh of relief. However, the saga shows that the green transition is going to be a messy, politically charged, and expensive journey with plenty of bumps in the road. Don't assume it's going to be a smooth ride. For your savings and loans, if this fiasco does push the ECB to cut interest rates again, it has direct consequences. The interest rate on your savings account, already pitiful, might go even lower. On the flip side, if you're looking to get a mortgage or a business loan, it could get cheaper. The cost of money is directly in play here. For the investor and the finance professional, this is a flashing yellow light for ECB policy. The central bank's job just got infinitely more complicated. The key thing to watch is the ECB's next set of projections in December. How they incorporate this ETS2 delay will be the biggest tell. It will test their credibility and their commitment to their own inflation target. The debate is no longer just about growth versus inflation, it's now tangled up in climate policy and political gamesmanship. The uncertainty level for European assets just ticked up a notch. In the end, we have a perfect storm of modern economics. A well-intentioned green policy gets kneecapped by political reality, which in turn creates a massive headache for a central bank, which could lead them to ease monetary policy, all while trying to navigate a world beset by geopolitical conflict and trade tensions. They're trying to fix the climate by making pollution expensive, but in doing so, they might just make money cheap again. You couldn't make it up. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in to Boss Economic World. Stay sharp, and see you next time.